Have you noticed how some people just start fading away from the world, quietly, without any drama, without any announcement, as if they've simply stopped needing to exist in the noise? You used to see them everywhere, talking, posting, sharing, and then one day they're just gone. No conflict, no goodbye, just silence. Makes you wonder, what are they seeing that others can't? What truth have they found that made the noise no longer worth their energy? The truth is, many people who have awakened spiritually are slowly stepping away from a world that feels too heavy, too artificial, too loud. They're not running from life. They're stepping out of illusion. They've realized that what most people call living is often just surviving under layers of distraction, comparison, and emotional exhaustion. The constant noise of opinions, trends, and digital chaos has turned existence into performance. But when your soul finally opens its eyes, when you begin to truly see, that performance becomes impossible to continue. The spiritually awake begin to sense the imbalance in everything. They feel the anxiety in conversations that revolve around status. They feel the emptiness behind forced smiles. They recognize how the world glorifies being busy but fears being still, and that realization changes everything. Suddenly, what once seemed normal begins to feel toxic. What once felt exciting starts to feel meaningless. You stop wanting to prove, impress, or belong. You just want peace. But peace has a price, and that price is distance. Because when your heart starts craving authenticity, you no longer fit into spaces built on pretense. When your energy becomes sensitive to truth, you can't breathe in places where everyone wears masks. And so, without even meaning to, you start disappearing, not because you hate people, but because you love yourself enough to stop pretending. This withdrawal isn't weakness, it's not depression, it's evolution. It's the deep, instinctive knowing that your spirit can't grow where noise never stops. Psychologists call it emotional detachment, a protective response when your inner world becomes too different from the one around you. You start guarding your peace the same way you once guarded your reputation. You choose silence over explanation. You choose stillness over chaos. You choose depth over display. The world doesn't understand this kind of silence because it confuses absence with emptiness. But the truth is, this silence is full of clarity, full of awareness, full of healing. Spiritually awake people disappear not because they are lost, but because they have found something greater, themselves. They no longer seek validation from noise, they draw energy from solitude. And here's the real reason to stay, because what they're discovering in that quiet space is what every human being secretly longs for: peace that can't be taken away, confidence that doesn't depend on attention, freedom that doesn't need approval. When you understand this, you realize that disappearing isn't about giving up on the world, it's about returning to your essence. So, if you've felt distant lately, if the world feels too loud and your soul too tired, maybe you're not breaking, maybe you're awakening. Maybe your silence isn't rejection, maybe it's alignment. Stay with this message until the end, because what you're about to uncover might just remind you that the quiet path isn't lonely. It's sacred. It's where the noise ends, and you finally begin. The world today is drowning in noise. Everyone is speaking, few are listening, and almost no one is thinking. The endless scroll, the flashing screens, the constant notifications, they have become the heartbeat of modern existence. But that heartbeat isn't life. It's addiction. It's a cycle that keeps you chasing stimulation while starving your soul. You wake up reaching for your phone, not your peace. You check what others are doing before asking how you feel. You confuse being informed with being awake. And yet, deep down, a quiet part of you knows something is wrong. That quiet voice, the one you've been trying to hear beneath the chaos, that's your awareness calling you home. But the noise of the world is designed to drown it. Every algorithm, every ad, every trend is crafted to pull your attention away from the present moment. It keeps you reacting instead of reflecting. It keeps you busy instead of alive. And when you finally pause long enough to breathe, you realize the cost. Your mind is crowded, but your heart feels empty. Spiritually awake people sense this imbalance more deeply than others. Their sensitivity isn't weakness, it's awareness amplified. They can feel how artificial things have become. They notice how conversation has turned into competition, how truth has been replaced with opinion, how connection has been reduced to clicks. Their minds can't find rest in noise because their spirits crave meaning, not stimulation. So they begin to step back, not out of superiority, but necessity. The louder the world gets, the quieter their souls become. Psychologists call this overstimulation fatigue, when constant exposure to meaningless noise numbs your emotional system. The human brain was never meant to process so much at once, and when it does, it loses touch with peace. The spiritually awake feel this overload acutely. They recognize that the more they consume, the less they connect. They see that modern connection often leads to inner disconnection, and so they begin to detox, not just from screens, but from energy that drains rather than nourishes. This withdrawal is not about isolation. It's about recalibration. It's about returning the mind to stillness so it can finally hear the truth beneath the chaos. When you strip away the noise, what's left is clarity. And in clarity, you see that most of what society chases, status, validation, constant entertainment, is a distraction from emptiness. The spiritually awake stop playing that game because they no longer need the world's noise to feel alive. They've found that silence is not absence. It's presence in its purest form. And that silence becomes a kind of power. When the noise of the world loses its grip on you, manipulation fails, fear weakens, the opinions of others stop shaping your worth. You begin to feel what real freedom is. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to not need what the world tells you to want. The reward for walking away from the noise isn't loneliness, it's liberation, the kind that lets you feel deeply again, the kind that lets you think clearly, love purely and breathe fully, the kind that reconnects you to life without filters, without performance, without fear. And when that happens, you begin to understand why the awakened disappear. They haven't left the world. They've simply stepped beyond its noise. They've traded chaos for consciousness, and in that silence, they found the truth the world forgot how to hear. When you start seeing through the noise, something inside you shifts. The things that used to excite you suddenly lose their power. The endless chase, the pressure to be seen, the need to prove, all of it starts to feel hollow. You begin to notice how much energy people spend pretending to be okay, how much time they invest in looking successful instead of being fulfilled. And for the first time, you see it clearly. The world is busy chasing distractions while the soul starves for depth. This realization hits hard. It creates an ache that's difficult to explain. It's not sadness, it's awakening. It's the moment you realize that what society calls normal is actually numbness, that what people celebrate as ambition is often just escape from silence. You begin to feel the weight of living a shallow life, not because you chose it, but because the world trained you to. From a young age, you were told to compete, to climb, to consume, but never to connect. Never to pause long enough to ask, what truly matters?
That question changes everything. It's the question that makes you outgrow conversations that never go beyond gossip.
It's the question that makes you uncomfortable, in rooms full of small talk and hidden pain. You start craving something more. Not more things, but more truth. You want to feel something real again. You want meaning, not noise. Presence, not performance. Peace, not praise. And that's when the inner conflict begins, because once you taste awareness, ignorance no longer satisfies you. Psychologists call this existential fatigue, the point where your inner world becomes too awake to tolerate superficial living. You feel emotionally and spiritually drained by anything that lacks authenticity. The daily grind starts to feel like spiritual suffocation. Every shallow interaction chips away at your energy. You begin to realize that you can no longer participate in systems that feed emptiness and call it success. Your soul starts rejecting anything fake, and that rejection feels like both loss and freedom. But that discomfort is sacred. It's the soul shedding everything that no longer aligns. You stop chasing approval because you finally understand that validation doesn't equal value. You stop forcing connections because you'd rather be alone than surrounded by empty energy. And the more you let go, the lighter you feel. You start discovering beauty in simplicity, calm in stillness, strength in solitude. The quiet becomes your teacher. The stillness becomes your truth. This withdrawal from shallow living is not escape, it's evolution. It's your spirit remembering that depth is your natural state. You were never meant to live a surface-level life. You were meant to feel, to grow, to awaken, to connect deeply with yourself and the world around you. That's why spiritually awake people seem to disappear, because their souls have outgrown the superficial. They can no longer survive in places where meaning is missing, and while the world may not understand their silence, that silence speaks louder than words ever could. It says, "I will not trade my peace for participation." It says, "I choose truth over comfort." It says, "I would rather stand alone in authenticity than be surrounded by illusion." That choice, though difficult, is where real power begins. Because the moment you stop settling for shallow living, you stop living by the world's script and start living by your soul's truth, and that truth will always lead you home. When you start detaching from the shallow world, something remarkable begins to happen within you. The noise that once ruled your thoughts begins to fade, and a new kind of clarity rises from the silence. You stop reacting to every opinion, every judgment, every demand for your attention. The energy you once scattered across meaningless distractions begins to return home, to you. That moment of inner stillness isn't emptiness, it's the birthplace of transformation. It's where your spirit begins its quiet revolution. For the first time, you start to hear your own thoughts without interference. You begin to notice how much of your life was shaped by external voices. Parents, teachers, society, media, all telling you who to be and how to live. But in the silence, those voices lose their authority. You realize that most of them were speaking from fear, not truth. They wanted safety, not freedom. But your awakening doesn't crave safety. It craves authenticity. It craves the courage to live from your soul, not your conditioning. This is the beginning of your inner revolution, the moment you stop living as a reflection of the world and begin living as an expression of your truth. It's not an easy path. Growth never is. The ego fights to keep control. The mind resists uncertainty. But every time you choose silence over chaos, awareness over reaction, and truth over illusion, you reclaim a part of yourself that you once lost. You start realizing that peace isn't something you find, it's something you remember. It was always within you, waiting beneath the noise. Psychologists describe this as cognitive liberation, the freeing of the mind from conditioned patterns of thought. It's when you begin to see reality as it is, not as you've been taught to see it. Your priorities shift. You start valuing experiences over possessions, growth over comfort, meaning over attention. You realize that happiness isn't found in accumulation, but in alignment. You stop trying to control life and begin to flow with it. In that surrender, strength is born. You no longer need to shout to be heard, because your energy speaks for you. You no longer need to prove your worth, because your existence is already enough. The spiritually awake reach this state not through retreating from life, but by returning to it with new eyes, eyes that see through illusion, ears that hear the truth behind silence, and hearts that no longer seek approval to feel worthy. Your disappearance from the noise is not about leaving the world behind. It's about coming back to it with presence. You walk slower, you speak softer, you love deeper, you listen more than you talk. The same world that once overwhelmed you now feels different, not because it changed, but because you did. Awareness transforms everything it touches. When you begin living from that awareness, life becomes less of a struggle and more of a sacred experience. This is the quiet revolution of awakening, a revolution that happens within, not around you. You stop waiting for the world to give you peace and realize that peace is your natural state when you stop fighting what is. And in that understanding, you see why the spiritually awake seem to disappear. They haven't left life, they've stepped into it more fully than ever. They've learned that the deepest power doesn't shout, it whispers. It doesn't conquer, it surrenders. And through that surrender, they find something the world can never manufacture: freedom of the soul, The moment your spirit begins to awaken, you feel the tension between your truth and the world around you. It's not that you reject others, it's that your vibration no longer matches theirs. You start noticing how often people trade authenticity for approval, how easily truth is silenced to maintain comfort. The deeper you go within, the more foreign the outer world feels. Society celebrates speed, distraction, and consumption, but your soul starts craving stillness, depth, and purpose. The more you wake up, the harder it becomes to pretend that any of this chaos makes sense. This is where the real battle begins, not with the world, but within yourself. One part of you wants to return to the familiar noise just to belong again. The other part knows you can never go back. Awareness changes you in ways you can't undo. Once you've seen the illusion, you can't unsee it. Once you've felt real peace, chaos loses its appeal. You start realizing that fitting in was never your purpose, awakening was. And that realization makes you dangerous to a system built on sleep. Psychology calls this the identity conflict, the internal friction that arises when your inner transformation challenges the beliefs and norms of the collective. It's why the spiritually awake often feel misunderstood or alone. Their very presence disrupts the illusion others cling to. Their calm exposes the insecurity in others' noise. Their clarity threatens those who depend on confusion to feel powerful. The world doesn't know what to do with people who no longer respond to fear. That's why many quietly disappear, not out of bitterness, but out of love. They understand that you can't awaken anyone who isn't ready to see. You can't heal people still addicted to their pain. You can't wake a world that calls sleep success. So instead of fighting, they surrender. They walk away from the constant need to argue, to prove, to convince. They choose peace over participation. They stop seeking to change the world and begin choosing to embody a higher state of being within it. And that choice is power in its purest form. The spiritually awake no longer invest their energy in resistance. They invest it in creation, creating calm where there is chaos, truth where there is illusion, and love where there is fear. Their disappearance is not withdrawal, it's transformation into something the world cannot easily label or control. They have learned that real change never comes from fighting darkness. It comes from being light. When you reach that understanding, you begin to see why silence is strength. When you no longer react to every conflict, you conserve the energy that once drained you. When you stop trying to prove your worth, you reclaim the power that was always yours. You start to feel what it means to be free, not because the world changed, but because you did. This is what society doesn't teach, that awakening separates you before it connects you. You must first lose yourself in silence before you can find yourself in truth. The spiritually awake are not rejecting the world. They are preparing to rebuild it from the inside out. Their quietness is not retreat. It's the sacred pause before the rebirth of consciousness. And though the world may not see them, their energy is shifting everything. Their disappearance is the beginning of something extraordinary, the rise of a deeper humanity. Silence becomes their sanctuary. What the world calls withdrawal is, in truth, a return. A coming home to the self that had been buried beneath years of noise, pressure, and expectation. In that sacred quiet, something profound happens. The mind stops racing. The heart stops defending. The soul starts breathing again. The silence that once felt uncomfortable now feels like medicine. It heals what constant motion could never touch. It restores what the world's chaos had broken. Science confirms what the spirit already knows. Silence rewires the brain. It lowers stress, restores focus, and deepens emotional balance. But beyond biology, there is something spiritual happening here. When the external world quiets, the inner world awakens. You start hearing the faint whispers of intuition that were always there, waiting patiently beneath the noise. You start feeling the energy of life moving through you, the subtle rhythm that connects everything, the same stillness found in nature, in breath, in prayer. This is the dimension of being that most people never touch because they're too busy running from it. The spiritually awake stop running, they surrender to stillness, and in doing so, they uncover a power greater than any external success. Silence becomes their mirror, reflecting back the truth of who they are, not who they were told to be. It shows them that peace isn't a destination, it's their natural state beneath all the conditioning. When they sit in that awareness long enough, they realize they no longer need the world's validation. They no longer need to perform for acceptance or chase recognition to feel alive. They've found a deeper source of energy, presence itself. Psychologists call this a state of deep self-regulation, the ability to maintain inner calm regardless of external chaos. Spiritually, it's the point where your consciousness stabilizes. You no longer rise and fall with the opinions of others. You no longer chase happiness because you've discovered stillness is joy in its purest form. The spiritually awake embody this peace. They become grounded, unshakable, magnetic. Their silence isn't passive, it radiates strength. People feel it. Without saying a word, their presence shifts the energy of a room. Their calm disarms anger. Their stillness exposes the restlessness in others. Their peace becomes a silent invitation, a reminder of what everyone else is searching for beneath the noise. But this peace cannot be taught. It must be remembered. It cannot be forced. It must be allowed. And that is why the awake retreat, not to hide, but to make space for this remembrance. Silence turns into a spiritual practice. Every moment of stillness deepens awareness. Every pause between thoughts becomes sacred. They stop reacting to life and begin responding from presence. They start living intentionally, moving with purpose, and speaking only when words are necessary. The less they speak, the more they hear. The less they strive, the more they flow. Their energy no longer leaks through endless conversation or pointless conflict. It circulates inward, fueling growth, creativity, and peace. This is why the spiritually awake seem to vanish. They've realized that the world's constant noise is a distraction from truth. They choose silence not to escape life, but to experience it more fully. In that stillness, they reconnect with the pulse of creation, something ancient, eternal, and profoundly alive. Their disappearance isn't the end of their voice, it's the purification of it. For when they finally speak again, their words won't come from ego or fear. They'll come from the quiet place where truth was born. Their disappearance does not mean disconnection from humanity, it means they are connecting differently. The spiritually awake no longer measure relationships by quantity or proximity. They measure them by resonance, by depth, by the energy exchanged. Shallow connections drain them, but authentic presence nourishes them. They seek people who vibrate at the same level of awareness, who do not demand pretense or performance. Their circles shrink, but the quality of each connection expands exponentially. Every interaction becomes meaningful, intentional, and alive. They begin to see that most of the world measures success by attention, by numbers, by visibility, but they know that visibility without presence is empty. Popularity without depth is hollow. The spiritually awake learn that real impact is not loud. It is subtle, invisible to those who do not yet understand. They connect through intention, through energy, through quiet acts that ripple far beyond what the eyes can see. The world may not notice, but the effect is undeniable. Their influence grows not through shouting, but through embodying what the world has forgotten: authenticity, compassion, and aligned purpose. Psychology calls this intrinsic motivation, the ability to derive fulfillment from within, independent of external approval. For the spiritually awake, this intrinsic force becomes the anchor of life. They no longer live to impress or perform. They no longer seek to fill gaps with validation from others. They live because it feels alive. Every thought, every action, every breath is aligned with a deeper sense of purpose. They begin to move through the world with intention, their presence felt long before their words are heard. Their relationships transform too. They no longer tolerate superficiality or drama. They no longer give energy to negativity or manipulation. Every bond is intentional, every word chosen, every action deliberate. Even in solitude, they are deeply connected to their own spirit, to the subtle currents of life, to the pulse of existence itself. Their disappearance from the loud and shallow is not absence. It is a realignment of energy. They are conserving what matters most, their consciousness. The world misunderstands this. It calls it withdrawal, avoidance, or isolation. But it is none of these things. It is evolution. It is the redirection of energy toward what truly matters. The spiritually awake are not fleeing humanity. They are stepping into a higher form of engagement. They interact when they have something meaningful to give, not because the world demands it. They speak when truth must be shared, not to fill silence. Their presence becomes a mirror, reflecting the depth and calm that most people have long forgotten how to access. In this state, they begin to influence without effort. Their energy touches people in subtle, invisible ways: a calm glance, a deliberate word, a quiet gesture. Each becomes a thread in a network of awakening. People feel them before they even understand them. They inspire change not through persuasion but through example. The world cannot measure this impact, yet it is profound. The spiritually awake understand that influence rooted in presence is more enduring than influence rooted in noise. Their disappearance, therefore, is a choice of alignment over approval, depth over distraction, truth over illusion. It is a conscious decision to operate on a higher frequency, to interact in ways that honor their energy and theirs. And while they may seem absent to the untrained eye, they are fully present in the only way that matters, in the spaces where consciousness is rising, where awareness is expanding, and where life is being lived authentically, fully and awake. Their disappearance from the noise of the world is not an ending. It is an invitation, a call to remember what the soul has always known. The spiritually awake understand that the chaos around them is not reality, it is distraction. They have stepped back to see the system clearly, to observe its patterns without being consumed by them, to feel life without judgment. In doing so, they offer a mirror to anyone willing to look, a reflection of calm, clarity, and conscious presence that can awaken even the most distracted hearts. This mirror is powerful because it challenges the illusions most people accept without question. It exposes the emptiness in constant striving, the futility of seeking validation from external sources, and the cost of ignoring the inner voice. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance, the uncomfortable awareness that arises when reality does not match belief. The spiritually awake feel this tension acutely within themselves, but they also recognize it in others. They see the world chasing shadows, mistaking motion for progress and noise for connection. Their quietness becomes a silent lesson. The true growth comes not from busyness, but from awareness. They understand that most people are addicted to distraction because it shields them from discomfort. But the spiritually awake have chosen discomfort over ignorance. They face the emptiness, the stillness, the truth of their own existence without flinching. In doing so, they transform pain into clarity, restlessness into insight, and solitude into presence. This choice is not easy because the world constantly pulls back with pressure, expectation, and temptation. But every moment of resistance strengthens their alignment, sharpens their perception, and deepens their peace. The reward of this conscious withdrawal is profound. They begin to live fully, not externally, but internally. Every thought, every decision, every action flows from awareness rather than impulse. The world may not see it, but it is felt. Their energy becomes magnetic, their presence grounding, their influence subtle yet undeniable. They embody what most people spend a lifetime chasing: authenticity, clarity, and the freedom to exist without compromise. They no longer chase happiness because they have discovered that contentment is not given by circumstances. It is cultivated from within. This state of being rewires perception. Life slows down, the meaningless fades, attention sharpens. They begin to recognize patterns, opportunities, and truths that were invisible when they were distracted. Their intuition becomes clear, their empathy deepens, and their actions become deliberate rather than reactive. In this stillness, they see not only themselves, but the world more clearly. And with clarity comes power. The power to act from alignment, the power to influence without force, the power to live fully while remaining untouched by chaos. Their quietness is not absence, It is a conscious realignment with the essence of life. They are not rejecting humanity. They are showing a higher way to engage with it. By stepping out of the noise, they reveal what is possible when consciousness takes precedence over distraction, when presence replaces performance, and when the soul governs choices rather than fear. The spiritually awake are not lost. They are awake, aware, and living in a dimension most people have forgotten. And this is the ultimate lesson. The world does not need more noise, more followers, more approval seekers. It needs more conscious souls who remember how to breathe, how to pause, how to act from truth rather than compulsion. Their disappearance is a gift, not a loss. It is a call to awaken, to reconnect with essence, and to reclaim the power of living fully, deeply, quietly, and authentically. Those who are willing to see will understand that silence is not absence. It is the language of awakening. The spiritually awake have learned that the deepest power does not shout, it whispers. Their energy moves quietly, deliberately, and with intention. They no longer seek to dominate conversations, control situations, or demand attention. Instead, they cultivate presence, the kind of presence that shifts atmospheres, changes moods, and influences outcomes without a single word. The world may overlook them, but energy never lies. What they radiate reaches far beyond what the eyes can see or the ears can hear. They operate from alignment, not obligation. Their choices are no longer dictated by fear, expectation, or social conditioning. Every thought is weighed, every action is deliberate, every interaction is meaningful. Psychologists describe this as self-determined behavior, a state where intrinsic motivation guides action rather than external validation. The spiritually awake embody this principle fully. They live intentionally, creating boundaries that protect their energy, cultivating practices that deepen awareness, and choosing experiences that nourish the soul rather than distract it. The result of this alignment is freedom. Not freedom in the superficial sense, freedom from schedules, obligations, or opinions, but freedom from internal chaos. They are no longer pulled by fear, envy, or ego. They do not bend to the expectations of others because their own expectations are clear and unshakable. They understand that happiness, fulfillment, and power come not from circumstances, but from presence. When the mind is still, the heart is open, and the soul is anchored. They operate from a place of clarity that is immune to distraction, manipulation, and illusion. Their disappearance from the noise of society is therefore not absence, but emergence. They are emerging into their authentic frequency, a vibration that resonates with truth, depth, and consciousness. This emergence is magnetic. Even if unseen, it is felt. People around them sense a difference in energy, a quiet authority, a groundedness that cannot be manufactured. It is the natural effect of living aligned with the inner self. The spiritually awake do not need to perform to be respected. Their alignment commands recognition naturally. In this space, silence becomes a tool, a teacher, and a form of power. It allows them to observe without judgment, to respond without reaction, and to create without distraction. The world may interpret this as withdrawal, but it is in fact a form of deep engagement. Every moment of intentional silence recalibrates their energy, enhances their awareness, and strengthens their presence. They interact when necessary, act when necessary, and speak when it adds value, transforming every action into an expression of consciousness rather than habit. This approach rewires perception. Life becomes less about chasing and more about noticing, less about convincing and more about embodying, less about reacting and more about responding. They begin to perceive patterns, opportunities, and truths that remain invisible to the distracted majority. Their insight grows because their mind and spirit are free from clutter. Their decisions carry weight because they are informed by awareness rather than impulse. Every choice becomes a reflection of inner clarity. The spiritually awake have discovered that their influence does not depend on visibility or noise. It depends on alignment, presence, and authenticity. Their disappearance is a deliberate statement. Life cannot be lived fully if it is lived according to the world's definitions. Theirs is a higher way of being, where freedom, peace, and consciousness guide every move. And in this quiet, deliberate way, They are teaching the world the power of awakening without ever raising their voice.